Hi everyone. So I'm Charlotte and I am doing a webinar today on understanding how to keep your dog calm. So let's get started. So I want you to think about the last time you had one of those days where lots of little things went wrong. They all build up and then you suddenly go, that's it, I've had enough, I can't take anymore. And that might be losing your keys, hitting every red light on the way to work, having a big meeting on. On their own, you'd have probably dealt with them quite well. But because they've all built up, you go, that's it, I can't take anymore, I've had enough. Okay. So if you think of it like a bucket, so them things pay into that bucket. And then when you go, that's it, that's when your bucket's overflowing. Okay. So it's the same thing for dogs. So if you think of the things that happen to them as either bucket filling or bucket emptying from now on, that'll help you get a good grasp of where your dog is at and their energy levels. Okay. So anything bucket filling is anything that energizes them. And that can be positive and negative events. Okay. Anything that's bucket emptying are things that are calming for them. Okay. And the big difference between dogs and people is it actually takes 3 days for that bucket to empty in dogs. So anything that's happening in the meantime is just topping that bucket up. Okay. So this is how your dog's bucket works. So the positive and negative events happen and they pay into the bucket. Then that tops the bucket up, and the further the arousal increases, the bucket reaches tipping point and it begins to overflow. And this is when problem behaviors take place. And I'm going to go into them in a bit more detail in a second. So high bucket levels can make learning new skills really difficult. So this is a really good foundational exercise to help us just build on it. If you think of it like a house, we really need a good solid foundation before we can then start to build the walls and put the furniture in. Okay. So it's really difficult to build them new skills and build them walls if the foundation isn't solid. Okay. Sometimes it's just a temporary measure. Sometimes dogs need to always have their bucket managed. Okay. So they might always need to be one of them dogs that, you really have to be careful of the energy levels and what's filling into that bucket. And that's when your relapses can sometimes happen in behavior because they get into that high arousal state. Okay. So the lower the arousal increases, the calmer the dog. As arousal levels increase with events, calmness decreases, but like a seesaw. Okay. So, signs your dog's bucket is full or nearly full. Now, these are just some of the behaviours. There are more. It would totally depend on your dog. Okay, so you've got your obvious lunging, growling, barking, biting. Pulling on lead can be a sign of an overflowing bucket. Humping is definitely not sexual unless there's a female dog in heat. And especially if they are a female dog, then yeah, it's just a sign that the bucket's overflowing. They need a lot more calmness. And we're going to go through some strategies on how to keep them calm anyway. Some dogs get wild-eyed, really wide-eyed, dilated pupils, struggling to follow basic cues. So if you're asking for a sit and they're not able to do it, that's usually a good sign that the bucket's overflowing. Struggling to chew or inhaling food. So they might just be really just swallowing that food or gobbling treats down without actually chewing. Chewing is a fine motor skill which is hard to do when the bucket is full. Unable to take treats nicely, so again, it's a fine motor skill to control the mouth. As soon as they start to get excited or that bucket starts overflowing, that's one of the first skills that goes out. So snatching for treats. And that's a bit like if you're really excited or really nervous, or you've just had some horrible news and your nervous system is in overdrive, your handwriting changes. That's a fine motor skill too. You probably really struggle to write properly, or your handwriting would be different compared to what it is on other times. It's the same thing for our dogs, really. Okay. Zoomies or dogs mad 5 minutes, that's a good sign that a bucket's overflowing. Action prompting or attention seeking behaviours, so jumping up, pawing, unable to settle, pacing and crying are all signs that a bucket is overflowing as well. Okay. Let me just change over. Okay, so some examples of positive and negative events that pay into the bucket. So positive events, things like excitement, talking in certain voices, going out for walks, seeing other dogs, and these might not be necessarily positive for your dog. These can sometimes fall into the negative category as well. Okay, so it's really important that you understand what works for your dog and what's good and bad for your dog. Okay. Fast play and fast moving games like tug, chasing balls or other dogs. So, your dog might be having a great time chasing the ball, but actually it is bucket filling because it is quite a frustrating behaviour. Chasing other dogs, if they're going to doggy daycare and they're having 8 hours of a free-for-all with other dogs, then that can definitely be bucket filling too. Okay. Constant doing. So if you're pottering around the house, what are they doing? Are they pottering around with you? Are they able to settle if you're moving around the house? A predictable routine is a big one that we usually work on with a lot of behaviours. So dogs obviously can't speak English. They've learned to communicate with us by constantly predicting what we're about to do. And because we're such creatures of habit, they're usually spot on. So a certain pair of shoes that you might put on for dog walks, a certain coat, and they might already be predicting that they're going out for a walk. They're probably already 6 streets away barking at that dog that lives at number 16 that's always at the gate. Or, do you always see a certain dog in like a field or a certain area of the park, and they're already there, like, amped up, bucket full, and the bucket might be 3/4 of the way full, sorry, before you've even left the house. So we tend to do a lot of work on that. Going to the treat cupboard, how often do you go to the treat cupboard and they don't get a treat, or pick up the harness and they're not going out for a walk? Chances are it's not very often. Okay. So also movement. So a lot of working breed dogs are bred to find movement very stimulating and very interesting, and even to do their job based on movement. So flushing birds out, chasing rabbits, so that might be dogs or family members that are moving, or it could be a leaf blowing across the path, in the wind. So that they're all little things that can definitely pay into that bucket. Okay. So negative events that can pay into the bucket, quite self-explanatory really. So fear, frustration, so being unable to get to a treat, meet other dogs, worrying events like loud noises, anxiety, pain, itchiness, skin or ear allergies, gastrointestinal upset, so stomach pain and reflux, which dogs can also get. Obviously some of the positive events that might happen might also be negative events too. Needing the loo is another one that's not on there, but that quite often is a bucket filler, especially when dogs are going out on walks. They can often, really excitable, and that bucket really kind of overflowing and then pulling until they've had the loo, they've gone for a wee or a poo, and then they're okay again. They sort of calm down a little bit, and it's just because that bucket's overflowing. Okay. So things to remember, again, try to think of everything that happens to your dog from now on as either bucket filling or bucket emptying. So bucket filling is the energizing stuff, so these positive or negative events that pay into the bucket, and bucket emptying is anything that calms them down, which we're going to go through properly in a sec. Number 2, just because the bucket is full of positive events, it can flip into a negative bucket. Okay, so just because your dog's been running around playing ball for the past hour, that can still then sometimes mean that they're a little bit more reactive, because that bucket is overflowing. And a good example of that is if your dog, if you've ever observed kids play fighting and they're getting overstimulated and you go, this is going to end in tears, and then 30 seconds later all hell breaks loose. Or if they're crying and laughing at the same time, and it's the same principle, so their bucket is just flipping from positive to negative, and it can happen very easily with dogs too. And the bucket is changeable. So there are games and exercises we can do to make your dog's bucket bigger, fill slower, and empty quicker. Okay. And they're all trainings that we can work on. But yeah, so if you think your dog's bucket is the size of a thimble and it gets filled up with the tiniest little thing, don't stress. We can work on that. Okay. So what can we do to help? So this is the reassured method that I use with my clients. So the first thing is rest. Now, it goes without saying, I'm quite grumpy if I don't get my rest. Okay, anything fills my bucket when I don't get my rest. And it's the same thing for dogs. So dogs need, for an adult dog over 12 months to 2 years, once they've stopped growing, depending on the size of the dog, you can expect them to be getting about 16 to 18 hours of rest a day. Or that's the amount of rest that they need a day anyway. For puppies and some other breeds, like livestock guardian breeds, you will be looking at 20 to 21 hours of rest a day. Okay, now that's usually a really big shock to a lot of clients when I say that. So take a second to think about if your dog actually gets that amount of rest. Because not many dogs that I meet that have behavioural issues are getting that. And sometimes that can be a really good quick win that we can get. Okay. Expectations. So this is more for issues in the house. But if you've got a dog that struggles to settle at night because they're constantly wanting you to throw the ball for them, you would probably set the expectation that this isn't what happens in this room. Okay, so you would have the lounge, for example, if that's where you're trying to settle at night, you would have that as just a calm space. So no play, no craziness in there. It's just a place that we come and we just chill out in here. Okay. Yeah, that might also be boundary games as well that we might implement there. So getting your dog to settle on a mat or in a bed and going, actually, this is the expectation for here as well. Okay. Affection and massage is for A. So massage ear rubs, belly rubs, where the harness or lead might sit and collar might sit around the neck and the shoulders, especially if your dog's pulling on lead. Really good for them, helps lower the blood pressure and calm them down. S is for sniffing, chewing and licking. If in doubt, sniffing, chewing, licking is your go-to. Super powerful stuff. Helps release endorphins and calm them down. Yeah, so you things like your snuffle mats, scatter feeding on grass is even better. Letting them sniff when you're on a walk, it's their walk probably more than yours actually. And if your dog's only doing 10 minutes of sniffing or 20 minutes of sniffing and you're looking to get your step count in, then you might want to consider doing an extra walk without them. But dogs see through their nose like we see through our eyes. So yeah, it's really important that they do get that chance to sniff and process everything that's happening, and the dogs that have come before them. It's just really important social behaviour. So chewing, things like long-lasting chews, kongs, and lickings, like licking mats and kongs as well. All really good stuff. Okay. Slow movement. So a lot of dogs, especially when they're out on lead, and if your dog is one of the dogs that has an issue seeing other dogs or people out when they're out on walks and they stop, so a lot of dogs will stop and then explode, and it becomes a bit of a pressure cooker environment because they're not getting that movement in, and then when they do finally move, it's this big explosion of reaction or barking or lunging. And then the other one is the just generally fast movement. So yeah, either one of them, I would be looking at implementing some slow movement, such as figure of eight walking. So you literally walking in a figure of eight between two posts or two trees. And scatter feeding again is another good one because it gets them moving, it gets them interested in something else. Okay. Unpredictability. So this goes back to the predictable routines that we spoke about before, and implementing some level of unpredictability just so that we can get a more neutral reaction. Don't get me wrong, some routines are good. So we have a very stringent routine when we leave the house to help Freya stay calm when we're leaving the house. Otherwise, she hits the roof and thinks that she's being abandoned. So we, for example, pop her in a crate, we give her a chew, pop the radio on, and that's a really clear indicator and routine that we're going out. However, that is a bucket emptying routine because that calms her down. So bucket emptying routines that are calm and aren't causing issues for you are really good. Now, if you had a dog with separation anxiety, you might want to consider actually a bit of unpredictability, or dogs that are really excitable on lead, then you would do things like popping the harness on and taking it off again, or popping the harness on, getting ready for a walk, walking out the front door and walking back in again. Okay, because that's going to help them get a more neutral reaction to leaving the house then, and them steps towards taking going out for a walk. Okay, so the one thing about that is that if your dog as soon as you put the shoes on, or as soon as you put your coat, or even think about going near the harness. And some dogs know before you've even thought about going for a walk, that you are going to go for a walk. So in that case, you would do the unpredictability routine. So you would sort of ditch the routine, pick the harness up, etc. And then they might be on the ceiling, so you need to bring them back down again somehow. Okay, so sniffing, chewing and licking would be the go-to for that. Don't leave your dog on the ceiling if you're doing this and they're getting a bit crazy. Don't leave them hanging. Do give them something to bring them back down again, and it just reinforces that fact that actually, it's not excitable. Okay, now with this, repetition is key. So you want to do this about 3 or 4 times a day, or at least more than you are walking them. Okay. But the more you can do this, the bigger effect it's going to have. Okay. R is for relationship. So some people don't have a great relationship with the dog. It's just how it is. I get some people that have come to me using prong collars or shock collars, which can have an impact on the relationship. So that is obviously really important than being social animals. Okay. Easy wins is the E. So yes.
I've got cross trainer.
Okay.
What's your phone?
No, So easy wins is the other thing that we can do as well. Some dogs really struggle with lumping things together. So a lot of the time we would start off, especially at the early stages, really just making things easy for them and just layering things up as we go. And then the other one is ditching the bowls. So dogs are natural scavengers. They prefer to work for the food, just like we do, actually. So if we've been for a hike, we tend to enjoy our meal a bit more. Or sometimes we will actually physically work for it. So we pay a fortune, we get dressed up, we travel, we really do work for our food sometimes. And it's the same thing for dogs. If you can get rid of the bowl, rather than just a meal that's there and great, if you can do something else with it. So there is a whole host of different things that you can do with the dog's food, and set it in a routine that works for you as well. If it works for you to feed your dog at 7 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then do that then, but just give them different activities to do it in, and you're going to get a different level of calmness with them as well. So physical exercise is great, but it just makes them fitter. So we want to make sure that we're giving our dogs a really good array of food enrichment and mental enrichment for them. Okay. And it also helps them kind of work for the food from you as well, so we can use it with our training later on down the line too. But yeah, ditching the bowl is really powerful stuff. If you can do it and you can make it work, even if that's just maybe half of their daily food allowance a day or something, just to start with, just so that you can build it up and get used to it. But I would weigh out their full amount of food in the morning, so you know exactly how much you've got to play with, and then just find activities and have fun with it. And actually it's quite nice as a bonding exercise too. So going back to the relationship aspects, a lot of the time when our dogs have behavioral issues, it really drives a wedge between us, and it can make it really hard to find the good in living with them sometimes, and that's not me being dramatic. I get a lot of calls every day and people saying, look, we just don't know how much longer we can do this. We don't know if we're the right home for them. And seeing them use their noses, use their brains, work things out and problem solve, and just spending some quiet time together that's not going out for a walk where they're dragging down the street or there's issues, can actually be really nice. And just a really good experience for you both. Okay, so it makes you really appreciate that actually you've got a great dog there too. Okay, so a little bit of homework for you. And I want to know what your dog's bucket looks like. Okay, so this is the worksheet. I want to know the positive events that pay into your dog's bucket, the negative events that pay in, how you know their bucket's starting to fill. So what kind of thing do they do when the bucket's when their bucket's overflowing, and what strategies will you use to help empty their bucket. Okay. And it's really useful to have that as like a reference sheet, because if you start, well, you should start to notice big difference in your dog's energy levels and how much calmer they are. But if you start to notice some of the old behaviors come back of them, their bucket starting to fill, then you can go, okay, so what's happened in the last few days? And you've got that there as a reference already. Okay. So yeah, hopefully this has been useful. I'm Charlotte, and it's been lovely talking to you. Bye now.